Welcome to today's episode of Buildings Hub Live, where we spotlight the changemakers and technologies leading the charge to electrify our built environment. On our podcast, we tackle the issues facing building decarbonization, from space heating to water heaters to electric cooking and beyond. On our final episode of the year, we'll sit down with Jenna Tatum, Executive Director at the Building Electrification Institute, and Panama Bartholomy, Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, to discuss the biggest building decarbonization developments of 2023. From court rulings to federal funding to stove bills and beyond, stick with us as we take a look back at what happened this year. Here's your host, Atlas Public Policy Analyst, Zach Strauss.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 12th episode of Buildings Hub Live. My name is Zach Strauss, Policy Analyst at Atlas Public Policy, and I have the pleasure of being your host today. For this episode, we'll break down the key building decarb developments of 2023, from court rulings to stove bills to wins on the state, local, and federal level. A lot has happened in 2023, and we're excited to dig into it. What lasting impact will these developments have on the building electrification movement, and what might be in store for us in 2024? Stick with us today to find out. Before we jump into our discussion, a quick note on Buildings Hub. Here at Atlas, we manage a one-stop shop data analysis tool for building sector electrification called, you guessed it, Buildings Hub. If you're interested in heat pump market data, state policies and funding programs, U.S. housing data, federal funding opportunities, we've got you covered, and a lot more. Likewise, if you like a good, concise read, we just dropped our 2023 year Building Decarb Top 10 list on our website. Check it out after the show. We encourage y'all to register for our platform and check out that article and all of our data features. We'd love to have you join the Buildings Hub community. Now, on today's live on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we encourage our audience to send us over your questions, and we'll put them in as we go along. You can do so through the Q&A portal on our YouTube channel. It is now my profound pleasure to introduce our special guests today. We are joined by none other than Panama Bartholomy, Executive Director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and Jenna Tatum, Executive Director of the Building Electrification Institute. A big welcome to the both of you. Thank you so much for being here today on Buildings Hub Live.
Thanks, Zach. Great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we have lots to cover, only half an hour. So we're going to get right into it. So it's great to have y'all with us today. I wanted to start with a high-level question about your work in this space, building decarbonization, building electrification. How are you and your organization striving to achieve a decarbonized and electrified building stock right here in the United States? How are y'all involved, and what work are y'all up to right now? Let's start with Jenna.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Great to be here. So BEI's focus is to work with high ambition cities to develop equitable and replicable policies that electrify our buildings, while also addressing our housing affordability crises and supporting the creation of high-road jobs, because we know these are intersecting issues. And while certainly not the only actors in the space, we strongly believe that cities and communities play a powerful role to come up with innovative ideas, develop the proofs of concept that we need, and de-risk policy solutions for other levels of government, like states, which Panama will probably be talking to you about. And this is not theoretical. We see this happen with all-electric reach codes or gas bans, which cities pioneered with building performance standards to drive down emissions from large existing buildings, both of which are catching on in a real way at the state level. And we also believe cities are key to enacting or to supporting equitable and effective implementation of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. So billions of dollars will be flowing from the federal government to states and cities, and we believe we need to build out that infrastructure very quickly to make sure that these dollars reach those who are most in need, including historically disadvantaged communities. So we think this infrastructure works best at the local regional level, but we collaborate with all levels of government and look forward to seeing cities continue to lead the way and innovate.
Thank you so much. I've had the pleasure of working with BEI and your staff over the course of the 2 years, and I really like that you're focused on city and local efforts and making so much happens in the spaces on the local level, building codes, electrification requirements, incentives, consumer outreach, workforce development. So it's so critical to be on the ground in those cities. Thanks so much. Over to Panama.
Thanks, Zach. So when we started the coalition back in 2018, what we found is there was a whole bunch of different groups and sectors talking about building decarbonization, but they were mostly fighting when they came to talking to each other. And there wasn't a forum where we could really bring together all the stakeholders that need to work on building decarbonization into a forum where we could work on really what was about 80% agreement on the solutions. And through that, really build trust to be able to start to work on the other 20%. And so we started the coalition to try to create that forum where we could bring together utilities, manufacturers, the rest of the supply chain, the design and construction community, government agencies, and nonprofits to all have a conversation around how are we going to completely decarbonize our buildings. We do this through three different ways: through policy development, market transformation, and consumer education. And we feel strongly that each one of those things is necessary to work on, and each one of them actually need the other two in order to be successful. We focus our work at the state level because we feel like that's where we can have the biggest impact and can provide the greatest amount of certainty over the greatest amount of customers for the market.
Thank you so much. I love that we have local perspective, people working on the state level. We need both of those things happening in tandem. And I also likewise have worked with people at BDC over the past 2 years, and it's always been a pleasure. And I think they do great work. So shout out to both of these organizations. But we're here today to talk about the trends and changes we saw over the past year in building decarbonization here in 2023. To start us off on a positive note, I want to start on a positive. What do you both see as the biggest win for building electrification and energy efficiency of 2023? What impact might it have on the long term? Let's start with Panama.
So for me, it's seeing the amazing market trends in this space right now. It's looking like 2023 will be the second straight year that heat pumps are going to outsell gas furnaces. Last year was the first time that ever happened, and it looks like it's happening again, even looking at the headwinds of high interest rates and inflation that we see. And I think at the heart of that is a lot of the policy work that's been done at the state and the local level to really push this forward. Because of the work that Jenna has done and other groups and inspired leadership, 1 in 4 Americans now lives in a jurisdiction that's adopted a building decarbonization policy. Over 100 communities across the United States have passed policies around new construction and some around existing buildings. And so I'm really encouraged by seeing how that policy has already resulted in really significant market demand. And the U.S. Climate Alliance announcement back in September around governors representing 55% of the nation's population, pushing towards 20 million heat pumps installed by 2030, I think is only going to accelerate this further. So I'm really excited about seeing the market growth.
That's great. Yeah, we tracked a lot of that, the heat pump sales data as well. And we did see that in 2022, we saw central heat pumps outcompete those gas and oil furnaces. And that's true. We tracked it even until 2023. And that trend has continued, like you said. So very exciting in the terms of heat pump adoption across the country. Over to Jenna.
Yeah, great. In my eyes, I agree with what Panama said, and we'll add the rollout of IRA funding and programs that really hit the market in 2023. Nothing motivates like action like money, so we're really excited to see that money coming down to states and cities. I will add a caveat, though, that in the rush, there is a risk that policymakers will cut corners as they're designing funding programs, and we really want to make sure that these programs are designed effectively and equitably. And so we want to move away from a more traditional way of designing building retrofit programs into ways that build on best practices that many cities and states have been developing over time. And here at BEI, we're pushing a concept called community-driven retrofit accelerators. I will actually pause here and give a call on all of our communications experts to help us with that name. We need a snazzier name. We're not the comms experts necessarily over here at BEI. But the idea is that in order to leverage all this IRA funding, we need to create more streamlined programs with wraparound services that accelerate retrofits by actually catering to those who are the hardest to reach, not just the low-hanging fruit, the easiest to reach buildings. And so what I'm excited about is that the IRA presents this amazing opportunity to get really creative about our building retrofit program and program design and truly co-create these programs with the communities who we seek to serve. And the good news is that many cities, states, community groups are taking this call to action seriously. And we're seeing some emergence of really amazingly innovative new solutions and programs, all motivated by the historic IRA investments. That gives me a lot of hope and enthusiasm for what's to come.
That's great. I think about that a lot too, thinking about not just people living in single family homes, people with all of the means to make these changes, but people living in multifamily homes, people living in difficult utility jurisdictions, or people living in rural communities. It can be quite challenging. So it's making sure we engage with the whole pie and making sure we reach the hardest to reach people first, and then we can work backwards. I think that's a really interesting and an important perspective.
Exactly.
So we talked about some of the highs, and now we have to talk about one of the biggest blows I think we faced this year. So we saw the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals this year strike down Berkeley, California's first in the nation 2019 prohibition on gas infrastructure in new construction. I see this ruling as a pivotal moment for building electrification policy. So I want to hear your perspective on this. What does this really mean for state and local actors? And what reactions have we seen from those who had already enacted similar mandates and might be looking for alternative options? Let's go to Panama.
So Zach, you want to know my initial reaction? It's boo. This was a terrible, terrible decision, and perhaps not surprising. The 3-court panel of the Ninth Circuit that put out this decision was, not to get political here, but 2 Trump appointees and a Reagan appointee. I mean, you couldn't have had a worse panel for building decarbonization coming out of the Ninth Circuit. The decision's been appealed. We're still waiting. There's no rules on the courts in America, and so we have no idea when that appeal will be heard, but we're hoping to get a much better ruling out of the larger Ninth Circuit. What we've seen is still continued leadership from state and local governments, even in spite of this setback. After this, you still saw the whole state of New York move forward with their All-Electric Act. You're still seeing large cities moving forward to try to protect their citizens and be able to craft a clean energy future for their residents. So while there was a momentary pause and I think a freeze, and there may have been some cities that may have been on the margins trying to decide about whether to move forward, largely those that have taken leadership have found a way to be able to internally talk about how to continue to do this in a legal and a protected way. We feel there's a number of legal options that are still available to state and local governments to be able to pursue besides the Berkeley model, which we think will be exonerated in the courts. And we really feel like at the state level, large-scale building decarbonization policy for new construction is still very possible. And at the local level, sometimes you need that leadership in order to be able to push the states and still feel like locals can go ahead and adopt all electric standards.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually surprised by how many jurisdictions have just continued to press on despite the ruling, sort of regardless. And a lot of jurisdictions have actually continued after the fact, sort of in the face of it. Jenna, do you have anything to add to what Panama provided here?
Just that cities are tenacious. They're not going to take this as the be-all, end-all ruling. Many cities, as you mentioned, are continuing to enforce their codes until there's legal clarity. I'm also excited about a new, strong electric preferred code option in California that I believe will pass legal muster no matter what, and is a promising option for even the more risk-averse cities. Mm-hmm. And then also, while the Ninth Circuit setback is real, it did cause a pause and a bit of a freeze for a bit. It also gave some cities some space to explore existing building policies, which are going to be really critical for our progress moving forward. So things like replace on burnout requirements, building performance standards, appliance emission standards, like the ones that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District enacted, or passed, I should say. And these are really exciting and really important because ultimately existing buildings are the most difficult to electrify and also the biggest nut to crack, even more so than new construction.
That's exactly right. I think about that a lot too. It's just thinking about prohibiting gas in new buildings doesn't help us retrofit the millions of other buildings that currently exist in the US. I wanted to give a shout out to Washington State because they initially had a regulatory all-electric requirement, and they paused, and then they got innovative and they started to use the building code to create an incentive system that would push and encourage contractors to install heat pumps and other all-electric appliances just to gain permitting. and just to like meet muster for the building code. So I thought that was really innovative in a way to, be within the parameters of law. So I think that was something to call out. So shifting a little bit, another major development this year was the acute attention on gas stoves, or Stovegate, as the community started calling it, and the negative health impacts that gas stoves impart on those who use them, in particular with children and childhood respiratory illness. But as this issue became tied to public health, we also saw a major backlash from certain state and federal policymakers jumping to the defense of gas stoves with preemptive bills and supportive incentives. What do you make of this Stovegate in national discourse, and what will it mean for the future of electric cooking? Let's start with Jenna.
Sure. On the one hand, I am really happy that people are talking about the health hazards of gas stoves. It's been such an insidious public health problem with vastly more harmful consequences, to be clear, for low and moderate income households. And I'm glad it's finally getting the attention it deserves. It feels really overdue. On the other hand, I do worry about over-politicization. Obviously, this country has a major problem with people talking past each other and demonizing the opposition. And while I know we can't always turn off all that background noise, we generally have to live with it these days. There's still so much progress we can make when we focus at the regional or local level and on messaging that's going to appeal to local communities and values. And when we work with local, trusted regional messengers, and for a range of reasons, senators and members of Congress just don't always truly represent the people that they serve. And so I think now more than ever, we need to be investing in our local and regional civic leaders and infrastructure, and empowering these leaders to craft the right messages that are going to land so that we don't have to over-politicize this issue. So for example, messages we've seen are messaging around fixing the poor quality of our homes and modernizing buildings and bringing them into the 21st century. And other places it might really be focused on protecting children and lowering asthma rates. So what's going to work best in one place may not work well in another place, but that's okay, right? We can invest in some localized messaging, invest in trusted messengers, and advance the conversation in a productive way.
Absolutely. And I think not like beyond the scope of my work, people in my personal life were talking to me about it. My parents and my friends were talking about gas stoves. I was looking for an apartment, and I was asking contractors, and I was asking realtors, like, what if people were talking about this, and it started to become more of a conversation. Something I will note is that Florida, in response, has enacted sort of like an incentive or a rebate for gas stoves to protect them. But what's interesting is Florida is probably the state that has the highest percentage of electric stove users. So I found it to be so intriguing or amusing that the state with the highest share of electrification for cooking was the one trying to protect gas cooking. Anything to add, Panama?
Yeah, that just shows, Zach, how much it got into the culture war, unfortunately. For me, I think it's on the whole positive. What happened, as you both said, millions of Americans now have what is an incredibly sticky idea in their head that their gas stoves may be dangerous to the health of their family, and that's not something that you forget about. And when you go to make your next purchase of a stove, like those are the kind of things that hang on. And because of Stovegate, tens of millions of Americans were suddenly educated about this potentially the largest emitter of dangerous toxins in their home. So I think on the whole is positive. The outrage that came, I think was near, if not completely comical. Only 35% of American homes have a gas stove in them, and it's heavily on the coastal areas, us coastal elites. And so to see so many politicians, particularly from low gas states, calling for the protection of God, guns, and gas stoves was amazing to see. What I'm encouraged by, again, is the market trends and the increase in sales of induction stoves since Stovegate. And over the last year, we've actually seen a 75% upswing in searches for induction on Google as a direct result, I think, from the education that came from Stovegate. So I'm really encouraged that we're going to be seeing significantly more movement towards all electric cooking. And I think it's going to be coming from some places we wouldn't normally think of. In the first quarter of next year, Cal OSHA, the health and safety organization for workplaces, is going to adopt maximum heat thresholds for workers for how long workers in indoor spaces can be exposed to certain high temperatures. And we're expecting that one of the key outcomes of that is going to be a movement away from high heat gas stoves over to cooler electric stoves to be able to better control the indoor safety of workers in restaurants.
That's super interesting, and definitely an innovative approach to encourage the adoption of electric cooking appliances. I thought it was interesting that, well, both bills that were introduced in the House and the Senate, it was this Protect Our Gas Stoves bill. Both of them either did not pass in their chamber or died when moving into the Senate. So it was messaging, but it got people talking, and it got people asking about what induction even is. I know most people may not even know what that entails, but just a shout out, you can get a single induction burner at IKEA for $60. So if you're interested, you can check them out today. I'm also not paid by IKEA, just putting it out there. So I'm a nerd and I like talking about nerdy things. So we're going to get a little nerdy for a second. I do think a huge win for building electrification this year has been the big shift in federal regulatory policy. Can you talk more about what sort of regulatory changes we saw this year and what you think they mean for appliance standards going forward? So let's start with Jenna on that one.
Sure. And I think Panama might have more to say on this than I do, given his expertise. But in general, I will say that we need every tool in our toolbox, even the unsexy tools. And yes, I'm going to call federal regulatory policy unsexy. But sometimes it is those types of tools that are the biggest winners over the long term in terms of both impact and durability. And so these are the kinds of sleeper policy changes that we really need to be seeing and making progress on now so that we can continue to build on that progress in the future.
Yeah. EPA's movement to delist gas appliances from the Energy Star program and DOE's efforts around new efficiency standards for furnaces and for water heaters and their attempts on stoves shows a real commitment from this administration to not only be providing money through the IRA and through other programs, but also using their regulatory tools as well to be able to bring this about. To me, I'm encouraged by all of that and by the state and the local work. A big part of this, though, is how do we build the market to be able to actually provide the at-scale deployment of these technologies necessary to meet these standards. And one of the first things that we hear from our OEM members is, they're just like the rest of us. They're just looking for TLC, transparency, longevity, and consistency. Like that's what they're looking for from policy. And that's what the federal government can be providing with these standards, that if it's on an appropriate timeline, is providing that transparency, longevity, and consistency that the manufacturers need in order to be able to start to change some of their manufacturing infrastructure to be able to scale up the deployment of heat pump and clean electric cooking technologies. Without regulatory certainty, it's really hard for the manufacturers to be able to respond to this patchwork of efforts going on all over the country, and the federal government is best at supplying that. The other thing our manufacturing members tell us is the two big areas they wish everybody would work on is consumer demand and on workforce education and engagement. And so what are we doing to really have the Got Milk campaign of electrification, like Got Electric? And what are we doing to really get that message out there? And then making sure that we're designing the IRA programs, the utility programs, the state programs to actually work for contractors, actually work for these small mom and pop companies that are the heartbeat of this movement, so that they're incentivized to make this transition with us and to be able to help consumers that have got the Got Milk message and now want to make the switch with them. And so I think those are going to be critical to the implementation of the federal standards, is providing that certainty to the manufacturers, the consumer demand, and the installer, really being able to support the installer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Consumer education and supporting contractors. I look at contractors like I look at EV dealers or car dealers as like that really critical conduit to getting customers to adopt certain technologies. So if the EV dealer or the car dealer doesn't know about EVs, potential customer may not even buy one. They may not know what to buy. So if the contractor doesn't know about heat pumps, is more comfortable with gas furnaces or boilers or electric resistance, then we're not going to see a lot of adoption unless we're really giving the contractors incentives and regulatory certainty, and support, right? Giving more boots on the ground, essentially, to put things in. You did mention one thing at the end there, which is a great segue to our next question, which is about the rollout of federal funding and incentives from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA. So what is really exciting is that the enhanced tax credits that are in this bill went into effect this January for households and commercial entities for over 10 years. That's 10 years of certainty for those tax credits. And a number of competitive and formula grant programs opened up for applications worth millions, if not billions of dollars. So what do you see as some of the most important elements of this funding rollout, and what should you be watching closely next year? And Jenna, you mentioned this as sort of one of your top positive moments of the year. So I'd love to go to you first.
Sure, great. I think that this is an exciting moment that we're living in, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get the implementation details right here. I've witnessed that it's hard for funders and advocates to get down into the weeds. It can feel like a total slog, but it's going to make or break our success when it comes to IRA and how it lands in communities, and whether communities and voters feel like it's actually working for them. And to be effective, I think a lot of these implementation details really need to be co-created on the ground at the community level through collaboration between policymakers and leaders and representatives of communities, particularly those that have been historically left behind. And just remember that we can't solve climate change if our solutions only work for higher income homeowners. They have to work for renters. They have to work for mom and pop landlords. They have to work for low income homeowners who may be just barely hanging on to a generational home, and the wealth and the access to the middle class that comes along with it. So inevitably, there's a vast array of funding and IRA incentives and tax credits and dollars coming down the line. And that's going to add, in addition, a lot of complexity, which inherently benefits those with resources who can navigate that complexity and leaves behind those who have fewer resources and who can't. So that's why BEI has been working really hard on this community-driven retrofit accelerator concept, because it means we need to simplify funding programs. We need to build infrastructure that helps people stack rebates and incentives, provide them with a single point of contact to troubleshoot along the way, to provide training and qualification and QA/QC for contractors. It also means protecting renters from pass-through costs that landlords may seek to do and could cause greater displacement. And it means ensuring that workers who are employed to do the work are paid family sustaining wages with benefits and pathways for career growth. So we're really urging cities and states to work together on designing IRA programs for states to delegate some level of autonomy to local or regional levels to customize at least some aspects of the programs, like the Homes in the Hero rebate programs, to best fit the needs of local communities and make sure they land. Because ultimately, I want people to know that the government is actually working for them. And I think that those details matter when it comes to those perceptions.
Absolutely. And it's no small feat. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of programs. A lot of states really are having a hard time keeping up with all of the deadlines and funding requirements and development of the plans. But I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens, especially with the home energy rebates, that $9 billion program for particularly low and middle income homeowners and renters included, to purchase new appliances that are electric and to upgrade their homes to be more efficient. I'm really excited to see those come out over the course of next year. But it's no small feat. So we're hoping to see some good implementation and to work with states and local governments to make it happen. We're running out of time, so I'm going to move to this really important topic, which is state action. So we need to talk about some movers and shakers on the state and local level from 2023. So high level, where in the country do we see wins and progress? What about some setbacks? Are there any new exciting rebate programs or statewide policies taking the charge? So for me, I'll just give my first thought and then I'll leave it over to our guest speakers here. I continue to be amazed that North Carolina state legislature this year, with support from the Home Builders Association, prohibited the state from adopting a new building code until 2031, which means the state of North Carolina will be building homes based on an outdated building code for the next 8 years, which for me makes no sense. And will only probably hurt efficiency and consumer savings that could have come with it. But I'll digress and move over to Panama. Where do you think that we won or lost this year across the states?
I was really encouraged by some of the work that was done in the budget in California, providing over $1 billion for building electrification, in the legislature in New York with their All Electric Buildings Act. Some of the work done in Colorado and Washington and Minnesota around buildings and building performance standards and codes. But I was just blown away by last week the work by the BPU in Massachusetts and the adoption of a long-range vision for winding down the gas system and recognizing the need to focus on electrification and neighborhood scale electrification as well. We at the BDC just released a white paper 2 days ago on neighborhood scale building decarbonization, and feel like this is going to be a very important adjacent business model that's going to provide a backstop, a climate and equity backstop, to make sure that building decarbonization truly meets our goals around climate planning and protecting underserved communities.
Absolutely. Thinking about neighborhood decarbonization, something I love talking about is there is this exciting project in Massachusetts and Framingham where the utility is partnering with the community to install a thermal energy network, a completely electric, efficient way of heating and cooling the home that uses the power and the heat of the earth and not gas, which is super cool on a neighborhood level. Now, I know Jenna works a lot on cities, so I'm curious if you have any wins or losses from your members or your jurisdictions that you work in.
Yeah, great. I am going to elevate Denver as a gold star city here, especially when it comes to building electrification programs and policies. So the city passed their Energize Denver policies in 2021, which you probably haven't heard because it doesn't get talked a lot about, but I think it's the most ambitious policy in the country. It will require electrification in all commercial and residential buildings over 5 units beginning in 2025 at the time of system replacement, and also includes a building performance standard that requires energy reductions in large buildings over 25,000 square feet. But paired with that, they launched a $40 million entirely locally funded incentive program to cover a significant portion of the cost for what they're calling equity priority buildings for complying with those policies. And this is the kind of transformational change that we want to see, both the policy requirements that are accelerating action, but the funding and wraparound programs that Denver is designing now to make sure that no one is left behind, that costs can be covered for those who need it, and that we can make progress together. And Denver, to their credit, being such leaders, is also exploring how to strengthen housing affordability protections within their incentive program and ways to educate and train contractors. So it's really exciting. Look at Denver as a model. We're hoping to replicate that in more cities across the country very quickly here.
That's really exciting. I didn't know that a lot about the city itself. I know that in Colorado writ large, they released 3 big grant programs for heat pump adoption and for geothermal heat pumps, for public buildings, for new electric appliances, which is all really exciting. And one city I'll actually shout out is Ann Arbor. We had their sustainability manager on our podcast a few months ago, and they have a really ambitious goal of reaching net zero carbon emissions in their city by 2030, which is the most ambitious goal anywhere on the planet except Denmark, which I think is crazy. So really excited to see how Ann Arbor meets that challenge and makes good on that goal. So we have run out of time, but I'd love to go on our lightning round right here, which is our tradition on Buildings Hub Live, and it is exactly as exciting as it sounds. So it is fast, it is concise, and it is ready to go. So in 2 minutes or less, can you tell our audience what you hope to or expect to see in 2024 in building decarbonization? Do you see any trends, changes, or challenges on the horizon? And let's start with Panama.
Thanks for having me, Zach. Really enjoyed it. Always appreciate the opportunity to get together with Jenna again too. So what I'm seeing is I think IRA implementation is going to suck a lot of the air out of the room next year across the country. We're going to see probably 30 states that have never done electrification programs suddenly rolling out electrification programs. And I think that's going to take up a lot of time and energy. I expect that next year will be the 3rd straight year that heat pumps will outsell gas furnaces, and we're going to see significant growth in the heat pump water heater sector. I'm really excited to see some of the numbers in that recently. But I think one of the big trends we're going to see is the recognition of the need to be moving towards scaled industrial approaches to building decarbonization. And you're going to see bills in either a handful or more than a handful of states around trying to enable neighborhood scale electrification And because of that, we're going to see far more unions getting involved in a positive way on building decarbonization in 2024.
I love that. All of that together sounds like a really exciting year and a lot of work to do. Looking forward to it. Over to Jenna to close us out.
Great. And thank you so much, Zach, for having me in Panama. Always great to be with you here. I will echo Panama, although I will say instead of sucking air out of the room, I find it exciting to have so much time and attention from so many policymakers at all levels of government to be focused on IRA implementation and getting these buildings programs rolled out, I should say. I want voters everywhere to feel the tangible positive impacts of the groundbreaking investment that the federal government has made and know that government works for them. And I wanted to inspire ambition from state and local policymakers, as well as community leaders, to work together about thinking about how to best leverage those dollars and translate that actually into real progress, coalition building, and securing more sustainable long-term funding sources that we're going to need to invest in neighborhood scale solutions, as Panama mentioned, and to reinvest funding into homes and communities and workers that are often left behind. So I'm an eternal optimist. I think that that's possible. I think it will touch off collaboration and coalition building, and that we can all work together toward a future where, not only are we living in a fossil fuel free world, but everyone has a home they can afford and earns a living wage and breathes cleaner air.
I wish that for all of us, and I'm looking forward to working with the two of you and our community and state and local government leaders to make sure we can live in a world where we have clean air, water, and good land. Well, folks, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. It was actually a really great conversation. It was a really big pleasure to have you both here today. I want to say thank you very much to our speakers for joining us and to provide their expertise and insight, and to everyone here in the live audience who participated in our conversation today. So if you wish to watch this episode again or share it with a friend or colleague, you can find it on the Atlas YouTube page, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. We encourage you to check out our Buildings Hub platform, our top 1023 listicle, and to join our electrification community today. We hope to catch you on the next episode in the new year. Thank you for everyone who joined us in 2023, and we'll catch you in 2024. Thanks so much.
Happy holidays, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Buildings Hub Live. You can listen to this episode and all other installments in our podcast on the Atlas YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you're interested in additional content, check out our data, articles, and dashboards on Buildings Hub at atlasbuildingshub.com. Thank you for joining, and we'll catch you again soon in the new year.